am Sloane Archer, 35 years old. I used to believe that if I remained loyal and quiet, the truth would eventually speak for itself, but then a recording of my father's voice was edited, erasing my name from the final words. Family always favors those who know their place, and I understood silence doesn't protect you when others are rewriting your name into someone else's story. I used to believe that even if no one said my name out loud, there'd still be a space reserved for it somewhere, silent, but acknowledged. The message came just before 8. No greeting, no pleasantries, just a single line in the same font my mother always used, clean, slightly spaced out, the kind that looks formal even when it shouldn't. Dad's memorial is this Saturday. Cambria has arranged everything. No time, no place, no, we hope to see you, no punctuation. The phone vibrated once more, then stopped. I didn't pick it up again. It remained face down beside a coaster stained by a ring of something too sweet juice, maybe from weeks ago. The stain had dried into the fibre. I never tried to scrub it out. I walked to the kitchen and filled the kettle. Not because I wanted tea, but because boiling water feels like a habit that holds up when everything else tilts. The stove ticked, then caught. A thin hiss. I left the flame low and leaned against the counter. There were 3 coffee tins on the shelf, all the same brand. The front one was half empty, the lid loose. On its side was a misprinted slogan, comfort in every slup. Not sip. Slup. That typo had bothered me once. Now I found myself turning the can so the error faced outward. It seemed honest. I opened my laptop and logged into the old legal portal. My credentials still worked. No one thought to revoke access. The interface hadn't changed, pale grey background, serif font, cold as bank statements. Under interim representation, one line appeared in bold: Cambria, Archer, legal proxy estate liaison. Sole contact, nothing about me. Not in the footer, not even as a secondary emergency reference. I didn't feel the need to call her. Cambria doesn't argue, she rearranges. Words, context, timelines. She edits reality just enough to keep it intact from the outside. If I called, she'd remind me this wasn't personal. You haven't exactly been present. Or she'd say it in a way that felt like a compliment. We just didn't want to overwhelm you with the logistics. The water never boiled. I turned off the flame and poured it anyway. I took the mug into the living room and sat on the edge of the sofa. The seat cushion dipped slightly on the left, always had. Dad used to sit there with the morning paper. I used to avoid that spot. Today I stayed. The air held the stale trace of old coffee grounds and something faintly metallic, heat on steel, or the whisper of iron in a building that no longer breathed. I opened the drawer beneath the side table and pulled out my medical folder. It was heavier than I remembered. I flipped to the scan spine lumbar region. Herniated discs compression along L4. There was a red ink notation from a radiologist: structural shift, consistent with trauma. Cambria had once looked at that report and said without blinking, "You always were sensitive to pain." She'd meant it clinically, or at least pretended to. The edges of the scan paper were curling now. I slid it back and closed the folder. There's a chair near the window that no one ever sits in. It's too straight, too upright. I placed the folder on its seat, like offering it a posture I couldn't maintain myself. A truck passed outside. I didn't look. Instead, I walked back to the hallway closet and pulled down a cardboard box. No label. Just a single strip of clear tape. Inside were gloves, naval issue leather, still pliable, though the palms had begun to crack. I slipped one on. Inside the wrist, stitched in grey thread, was my name. The A in Archer had a missing crossbar. I'd noticed it the first time I wore them and said nothing. No one else had noticed. There had been a photo once, me in uniform, Dad standing beside me, his hand just slightly behind my shoulder, not quite touching. Cambria had taken the picture. She'd laughed when she handed me the printed copy. "You always make things so dramatic. Even your face looks staged." I'd kept the photo in a folder marked MISC, between tax documents and warranty receipts. I opened my email and searched for my name in the memorial announcement. Nothing. Then I searched guest list. A private link popped up, forwarded from a contact I barely remembered still had me saved. I clicked. It opened a spreadsheet titled Confirmed Attendees, Archer Memorial. Cambria's name appeared 3 times. Sloane Archer, absent. At the bottom of the list was a line, Slide 7, Family Composite, Cambria, plus Lorraine only. They'd chosen the photo without me. I reached for the envelope I'd prepared weeks ago, unsigned, unstamped. Inside was a draft letter to the family's legal team requesting clarification about estate amendments post-recovery. I read it again, then folded it in half, then again, and set it on top of the medical folder on the chair. I checked the time, nearly 10. The shadows in the room had shifted. The sun caught the edge of the chipped mug I'd set near the coaster earlier. The steam was gone, the surface smooth, the kind of stillness that doesn't ask to be noticed. I returned to the laptop. In a folder labeled Pending, I found the memorial slideshow file, password protected. I hovered over it for a while, not opening. The thumbnail showed a black background, white serif text. A life of steadfast legacy. Cambria always loved language that sounded timeless. I closed the folder. Near the bookshelf sat a frame I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a family photo, Easter, maybe 2009. All 5 of us. Cambria had red lipstick. I wore a jacket 1 size too large. Hair pulled back, a faint stain on the lapel that I hadn't seen until after it was taken. In the printed version now used at the memorial, that image had been cropped. I remembered because I'd found the original in Dad's archive. My left arm was gone. Cropped clean. There's a way people erase you and still expect you to thank them for remembering. The radiator clicked once. I stood still. The glove on my hand had started to tighten around the knuckle where the old fracture still swelled in winter. I took it off, folded it in half, and placed it atop the sealed envelope. If I'm not part of the file, not in the list, not in the slide or the frame, if they made me absent, I'll still show up. But not to be seen. Some people hold their breath, waiting for applause that was never meant for them. The first thing I unpacked after returning home was the coat, dark navy wool with a stiff collar and a single row of brass buttons down the front. The left sleeve still had a loose thread where my unit patch had been hastily removed before discharge. I didn't sew it back. It wasn't out of protest, just habit. Some things are easier to wear unfinished. That fall, I kept to the back room. I cooked when asked, washed up afterward. My name wasn't on the lease, and I behaved like it wasn't mine to speak first. At dinner, Cambria would talk about her newest partnership, how the board had unanimously approved her proposal, how even the CFO had started calling her essential. Her voice always struck a polished balance, meant to be overheard, but never opened for reply. I sat across from her, folded napkin in my lap, nodding slightly. Once I tried adding something, just a brief note about a similar chain of command model used in logistics overseas. Her fork never paused. Well, I guess every system needs order, even the broken ones. I stopped trying to contribute after that. There was a drawer in the kitchen with worn labels. I took it upon myself to relabel them one by one using neat handwriting and color-coded tape. Flour, brown sugar, jasmine rice. No one mentioned it. A week later, the tape had been peeled off and replaced with printed stickers that read, "Organized by Cam." I didn't remove them. The hallway closet had a mirror that angled downward slightly, probably from a warped nail behind the frame. I used to catch my reflection there, always cut off at the shoulders. My face seemed lower than it should have been. When my niece turned 5, I wrapped a storybook in brown paper and tied it with twine. I'd practiced writing the label 3 times before choosing the best one from Aunt S. At the party, the gift was passed over. Later, I found it under the buffet table with the corner torn and frosting smeared across the spine. I wiped it clean and placed it quietly on the bookshelf near the coats. No one noticed. During one of Dad's longer hospital stays, I offered to drive him to a follow-up. Cambria insisted it was covered. When we arrived later that day to visit, she already stood beside him, hand on his shoulder like a badge. "I've taken care of the asset paperwork. You don't have to think about it anymore." I stepped forward slightly, waiting. Dad turned to the nurse and gestured loosely. "That's my oldest. She's the one that runs everything now." I looked at the ivy drip, the slow cadence of the machine next to it, and counted each pause before it beeped again. On the way home, Mom asked if I wanted to stop and pick up groceries. I said we had plenty left. She adjusted the rear-view mirror without turning her head. "You've always had a tendency to overstay where you weren't needed." That night, I sat on the back porch and held the silver navel pin between my fingers. It had dulled over time, one edge slightly bent, where the clasp used to catch on the lining of my dress uniform. I kept it in the inner pocket of my coat, not to show anyone, but to feel its weight. The kind of weight that didn't leave a bruise, just left a dent. No one ever asked what I received it for. They assumed it was standard. Cambria's graduation photo still hung in the hallway, double-matted frame polished. Mine was never printed. I had mailed it once neatly enclosed with a thank you card for the family's support while I was stationed abroad. It never made it to the wall. Mom once mentioned offhandedly, "Well, you were always more private about those things." When we cleaned out the attic that spring, I found the box labeled keepsakes. Inside were Cambria's ribbons, certificates her kindergarten handprint cast in clay. I didn't search for mine. I folded the box closed and taped it shut again with new packing tape. The roll had just enough left for one full seam. I started walking in the mornings before the house was fully awake. Down the long stretch by the marshland, past the willow that used to have a swing tied to its arm. The swing was gone, but the frayed rope still hung worn white from seasons of wind. I walked past it each time without looking up. Sometimes I stopped by the post office on the way back. I never expected mail. Still, I checked the box. It was always empty except once one flyer damp at the corners for a retirement seminar I hadn't registered for. The tagline read, "Still valuable." Just in different ways. I kept it in my coat pocket for weeks before throwing it out. At dinner one evening, Cambria asked Mom if the wine rack needed refilling. "We're down to the Merlots." I'd rather not serve that to the committee. I had brought in groceries that morning, including a bottle of Zinfandel. It was still unopened in the pantry. No one reached for it. That night, I heard laughter behind the closed door of the dining room. The kind of laughter that fills pauses like mortar sealing spaces. I stood by the hallway light switch for longer than I meant to. The fixture buzzed slightly when turned on. I opened my drawer and found the note I had written months ago, still folded. It wasn't addressed to anyone, just a sentence I had copied from a training manual years earlier. "Failure to report is not absence." It is silence. The note was creased, the ink faint, where the paper had rubbed against a pair of cufflinks I no longer wore. I held it to the light and let the words fade a little more. That weekend, the neighbors hosted a block gathering. Mom sent over a fruit tray. "Take this to Cheryl, would you?" "You're not doing anything right now." I placed it on the table near the lemonade. Cheryl smiled politely and asked how my sister was doing. Not how I was doing, just how Cambria was. I sat on the edge of the deck afterward, one foot dangling just above the grass line. A small girl I didn't know pointed to my coat pocket and asked if the pin was a toy. I shook my head. She didn't ask again. Back home, the porch light flickered twice before staying lit. I closed the front door quietly behind me and hung my coat on the hook. The silver pin rested against the fabric like it always had hidden, but exact. I used to think if I stayed quiet enough, they would remember me as someone they were once proud of. Some erasures don't happen all at once. They begin in lowercase. The Christmas card hung from the fridge door with a clothespin painted gold at the tip. It read, "Warm wishes from the Archers, Gavin, Lorraine, Cambria and Max." Max was the dog. The card was glossy, thick printed on premium paper, the kind with raised lettering and a scripted font that curled around the edges like a private school emblem. I hadn't been home when it arrived. I saw it during a quick visit, the kind of visit that doesn't prompt unpacking. I'd opened the fridge for water and stood there a few seconds longer than necessary. No one noticed. The magnet beside it held up a shopping list for a dinner I hadn't been invited to. Spiral ham, scalloped potatoes, pecan pie, all checked off. I closed the door slowly. The hum of the refrigerator kicked in like a second thought. The card was still hanging the next time I came by weeks later. The ink hadn't smudged. The names hadn't changed. At the bottom drawer of the hallway console, there was a box of old correspondence. Birthday cards. School report covers a sticker book I recognized from 3rd grade. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just wanted to see if the handwriting had changed over the years. It hadn't. My Namehot. In a birthday card from 2018, Cambria had written, "To Sloane, keep being strong out there." No E, not even the version on legal documents, just a shortcut. I didn't mention it. People mistake things all the time, letters, intentions, distances. The envelope had been reused. There was a faint tear at the seal where the old name had been scratched off. Possibly Max's vet records. The glue was still tacky. There had been a dinner once shortly after I submitted a security protocol revision to the base commander. It was approved in under 72 hours, an unusual time frame. A colleague emailed me privately, said someone at the Pentagon had taken note. I didn't share that with anyone, I just showed up for dinner. Cambria arrived half an hour late, hair-curled, voice elevated. She sat beside Mom and whispered something that made them both smile. During dessert, Mom raised her glass. Cambria was just appointed financial liaison to the parish board. They trust her with everything. I looked down at the pie crust. It cracked clean down the middle. No one noticed the sound. Someone asked Cambria how she managed it all so effortlessly. She reached for the whipped cream, still smiling. When you're reliable, they remember you. The knife on the table had a small dent in the blade, like it had once been dropped and repolished. I used it to slice the edge of my pie, smaller. I wasn't named once during the meal. The Navy graduation ceremony had been small restricted guests, only tight security. I had sent an invite to Mom a month in advance with full instructions on how to request clearance. Cambria never responded. The seat next to mine remained empty throughout the event. Later that evening, Mom called. The background noise told me she was at a dinner somewhere. No need to call Cambria about these things. She's never liked those uniforms. Makes her feel boxed in. I hadn't mentioned Cambria. The dress uniform I wore that day had been steamed twice, shoes polished with a cotton rag until my fingers darkened. I'd carried a folded paper in my inner pocket, a letter from Dad dated the year I enlisted. He'd written it in block print. I may not always say it, but I know what you're made of. You walk straight. That counts. The paper had a crease from being folded wrong the first time. I kept it that way. It never occurred to me that the absence would become the story, that the seat next to me would hold more weight than the words spoken from the stage. Cambria once told a family friend that I prefer structure over people. The woman nodded, as if that was something admirable in moderation. During one winter cleaning, I found a pile of photos in the back of the hallway closet. Some bent, some with curling corners. Group shots, mostly. Barbecues, birthdays, reunions. In each one, I looked for shadows where I might have stood. In a picture from Mom's 60th, I remembered being there. I'd brought a lemon tart and used my own dish, not a foil tray. The dish wasn't in the photo. Neither was I. The frame that sat on the mantel was older, 5 of us all squinting slightly in the sun. Cambria in front, me in a too large hoodie, Dad's hand resting gently on Mom's shoulder. One day I found that same frame turned face down on the bookshelf. The back panel was loose. A small strip of duct tape held it in place. I lifted it slightly. The glass was clean. The image still intact. Only later did I notice the newer frames all shared something symmetry. 4 figures. Centered, polished, matched in tone and lighting. There was a photo taken last spring at a community event. Cambria had coordinated everything. She wore navy and white. Mom wore pearls. The caption on the social media post read, "The Archer, Women, Elegance, and Strength." I stared at the screen longer than I meant to. The comment below had one word. Beautiful. I had taken the photo. Back in my own apartment, I kept a shoebox near the entryway. Inside were items I didn't display, 1 service medal, an empty envelope with my name spelled right, a key to a door that had been changed after I left, and a torn postcard from a base I no longer belonged to. The bottom of the box was lined with paper from a shipment I never received. The return address had my name on it, spelled perfectly in courier type, unembellished. No one in my family writes it that way anymore. There's a sound that comes from being called the wrong name. It's not loud. It's the scraping of a chair on tile or the click of a lock turning after the door's already shut. I've never corrected them. Not once. Because the mistake was never really about spelling. I wasn't forgotten. I was erased slowly, deliberately, under the soft cover of silence. Some documents aren't read, they're swallowed whole, and felt later like a splinter under the tongue. The form arrived folded 3 times sharp creases running along the weight of it. My name was printed in all caps at the top, Sloane G. Archer, but it didn't anchor anything. The paper slid too easily from my mother's hands onto my lap. She didn't sit down. She pointed to the line near the bottom next to a yellow sticker tab. Initial here, and sign below. Her tone held the same rhythm she used when reminding me to refill a prescription or return a library book. Routine, not remarkable. The section header read, Post-Injury Recovery Authorization and Medical Proxy. A checkbox, already ticked, a barcode blurred by the corner. Under Section 14, in smaller print, the individual named below shall assume all decision-making authority related to the patient's ongoing care, financial disbursements, and representation in administrative matters. Cambria Archer. I looked back up. My mother's nails tapped against her phone screen absently, not anxiously. Cambria stood a little behind, her arms folded. She wore a black turtleneck. Not a wrinkle in sight. There was no bandage, no sling, not even a scar. Just her gaze fixed over my head, like I was a photo hung slightly crooked. I held the paper between both hands. The weight of it didn't match what it carried. On the end table next to a glass of untouched water sat the pill organizer I had refused to open that morning. I'd learned to count hours by how fast the water lost its chill. I asked why my name wasn't listed under the proxy section. Cambria's mouth barely moved. Must have been a system glitch. These forms aren't perfect. She didn't blink. The walls in the guest room had been painted a pale blue, the kind usually chosen for quieting toddlers or staging real estate. There was a bookshelf that hadn't been touched in years. I knew because one of the spines had faded into a sun-bleached grey modern federal defense policy, a book I'd underlined in 5 colors and never reread. The form remained on my lap. The pen next to it hadn't been offered, only placed. I asked if I could have a copy. My mother didn't answer. She picked up a paperclip from the table and began straightening it. The shape uncoiled slowly under her fingers. By the time she left the room, it no longer resembled anything useful. Later that night, when the house settled into that hush, unique to large, expensive homes, insulated against weather and truth, I walked to the printer in the office and quietly fed the document through the scanner. The USB was already in my coat pocket. Black, metal, smooth edges. I'd picked it up years ago at a base conference along with a notepad that said, "Integrity is operational." The notepad was long gone. The USB remained. The scan uploaded quickly. I labeled the folder with a single dot. Not a word. Just a placeholder for something that didn't yet have a name. I didn't take the form. I didn't confront anyone. I placed it back on the guest room table and pressed the crease flat with my palm. The next day, Cambria brought me a protein bar and a folded napkin. She didn't stay long. "Try not to move around too much. They're still adjusting your medication." There was no "How are you?" No mention of the stairs I'd fallen from during her graduation reception. No acknowledgement of the ache that traveled from my tailbone to my shoulder like a hidden thread stitched tight. In the hallway, someone had vacuumed the runner rug so clean the fibers stood stiff. I once thought silence was a form of generosity, that not speaking could leave room for others to do what's right. That morning I checked my medical record through the provider's portal. The login still worked, but my recent file had been marked as in review. Under primary contact, only one name appeared. Cambria. There were no notes about my fall, no reference to the visit from the base doctor, no entry about the X-ray I remembered lying still for counting the clicks of the machine. I clicked Export Record. The screen blinked. Then it showed a red bar permission required to view this information. The coffee mug in my hand felt heavier, as if the handle had shifted position. I placed it in the sink without rinsing it. Later, I checked the scan on the USB again. I stared at the line that handed over everything, the signature line. My name curved, but tight. Legible. Compliant. I didn't remember signing, but I saw my handwriting. My thumb rubbed the edge of the device. One corner had a small chip in it, a dent from a keychain I no longer used. The texture pulled at my skin. There was a voice in my head, not mine. Dad's. Always read what they don't say out loud. I used to think he meant strategy briefings or political noise, but maybe he meant this. What no one says is sometimes louder than any speech. By the end of the week, the form had disappeared from the table. Cambria left for a work trip. My mother began replacing meals with protein shakes, hers, not mine. In the trash outside, I saw the envelope the document had arrived in. torn straight across no return address. I pulled it out, flattened it on my knee, and traced the printed barcode with the back of my nail. The ink bled faintly like it had gotten wet once, then dried unnoticed. The flap of the envelope had one word printed on the inside in faint grey efficiency. I placed it in a separate folder. Sometimes a record doesn't prove anything. It only reminds you that you weren't meant to be part of the decision in the first place. The guest room lamp flickered that night. Not in a dramatic way, just once, like a breath caught wrong. I held the USB in my hand, closed my fist, and waited for the thought to settle. I wasn't losing my memory. I was beginning to remember it accurately. Some stories only begin when others believe you've forgotten them. I waited until the hallway light blinked off. My mother's footsteps faded past the stairwell, the sink's faint drip blending into the hush. My father's study door never had a new lock. All it took was a gentle tilt of the wrist at the right angle. Click. The screen flickered to life, the fan letting out a tired, mechanical breath. I entered the last passcode he used, 3 digits from his service number, a birth date. 1 capital letter. The desktop loaded with no order, just loose folders labeled Medical Letters Legal 2020. Inside, Legal 2020, was a PDF of the original will. My name appeared under co-beneficiary next to Cambria's, a yellow highlight streaked beneath shared responsibility of estate execution. No deletions, no edits. I inserted an old USB drive, its rubber edge frayed at the corners. Before transferring the files, I renamed the document 4S. 1 letter, not a full name. Not a clue, just enough to remind myself I was once inside the circle of trust. Above the monitor, tucked between manuals, sat a folded sheet of paper in blue ink. The handwriting, tilted slightly, left my father's. The words were simple. If anything happens to me, she knows where the backup is. No clear subject. Just she. But the underline under nose stretched long the way he used to do when under pressure. Next to it sat an external hard drive in a plastic case. Dust had settled into the grooves. I remembered when he bought it just after his second surgery. During a week, he stopped speaking much. At the back of the shelf was a photo frame, slightly faded. The picture, me in uniform beside my father, just outside the naval base. My first assignment. A faint crack ran through the corner of the glass. They say photographs can only hold one kind of truth. The rest lies in silence. Dinner the next evening was lasagna. My mother set it down, silverware clinking. I pulled out my chair with deliberate quiet. Cambria sat opposite her phone, placed face down like a habit rehearsed into meaning. I touched my glass, but didn't drink. My mother turned to Aunt Hilda, an old history teacher, who always smelled faintly of cinnamon and chalk. She refuses to cooperate, makes everything more complicated. The words weren't loud, but sharp, like a corner deliberately left jagged. Cambria nodded unfazed. Every conversation feels like a punishment. No one disagreed. I chewed slowly. A dull tightness ran across my lower back. No one offered pain meds. But the next morning my phone alerted me unauthorized login to my secondary bank account. Unknown device. Arlington. I locked the account. The operating system matched Cambria's laptop. I didn't confront. Inside my jacket I'd sewn a hidden seam. The USB fit perfectly into the fold. Later, I opened my personal laptop and created 3 separate backups: Legacy, Raw, Echo, and Untouched. They might call me paranoid, say I don't know how to let things go, but what they buried wasn't emotion, it was presence. Not a demand, not a plea, just the right to exist without having to earn it. While washing my face, Water trailed over my index finger. The skin was still raw where I'd scraped it on the stair rail the day of the graduation fall. Cambria had stood behind me. Her briefcase hung from her wrist. After the fall, she didn't bend down, didn't look back. Among the files I found one audio clip. My father's voice, quiet and strained tape, rustling in the background. Don't make her prove she was here. No name, no timestamp. But I knew the tone. It was the same one he used the day he handed me his old wristwatch, back when I still thought heirlooms were chosen, not assigned. That night, I wrote the phrase down on a torn grocery receipt, folded it twice, tucked it behind a tin of camphor in my drawer. They never asked if I had what I needed, but someone had tried to reset my email password. When I passed the kitchen, I saw the napkin drawer open, a used envelope inside. My name was written in block letters across the front, but the paper was empty. A gesture, almost. No one mentioned it. I returned to the study the following night, not to gather more, but to see what had been moved. One of the folders was renamed Archived. Inside Cambria's name now appeared in the metadata. She had been here, too. I didn't touch it. The printer blinked low toner. I printed only one page, the handwritten note, scanned it, saved both the digital and physical copies in separate places, labeled the folder if needed. During breakfast, Cambria scrolled through emails while my mother peeled an orange with surgical precision. The room smelled like overripe bananas. The clock ticked loud, though it had never bothered me before. I think she's recording things, my mother remarked. She always over-documents, makes herself look like a victim. The word settled over the table like a film. No one corrected them. I ran my fingers along the seam of my coat later that afternoon. The stitches held. I didn't speak up. I didn't file anything official. I didn't broadcast. But I was writing. Not with declarations or warnings, with dates, with file names, with unedited files. Not revenge, just evidence, just memory. I don't need them to remember me correctly. Only to know I never disappeared. I was tracing their silence in my own way, word by word, bite by bite, without asking permission. And if it comes to that, I know exactly where the backup is. There's a kind of quiet that doesn't echo, it simply holds. The apartment smelled faintly of cardboard and lemon oil. The keys had come in a manila envelope, no name printed, just a 5-digit code, and an address I hadn't shared with anyone. I kept the slip of paper folded in my wallet, behind a transit card I hadn't used in years. No photos on the walls yet, just a faint outline where a hook once held someone else's frame. I didn't rush to fill it. I boiled water in a second-hand kettle, matte grey with a dent near the handle. It let out a thin whistle that didn't insist on being noticed. I poured the water into a mug with a hairline crack that only showed under certain light. The tea bag floated crooked. No one interrupted. My phone was off. My name didn't appear in the lease agreement. Even the router account was registered under initials I hadn't used since training. There was no Cambria here. No Lorraine. No one asking where I'd been or why I hadn't answered the group thread. On the small table near the window, I placed a single photograph. It had spent years folded inside a copy of the Federalist Papers, tucked behind the chapter on individual agency. The photo had curled at the edges, my father and me both in uniform, both looking slightly off-camera. His hand rested on my shoulder, not in pride or possession, but familiarity. That version of him never made it onto the living room shelf at home. This photo didn't exist in the curated family timeline. It had survived because I hadn't given it to anyone. No one had deleted it. I opened the laptop new, unregistered, clean. I didn't connect it to Wi-Fi. There was no cloud here, no sync across devices, just me, the files, and whatever still made sense in raw format. I began organizing folders, the first unauthorized transfers, PDF screenshots of bank statements, small numbers at first, incremental withdrawals masked as reimbursements. The metadata tags all led back to a desktop labeled Lorraine Admin. The second, access logs, health records, a spreadsheet of IP addresses, timestamps, and flagged login attempts. My file had been opened 3 times the week after my fall, none by me. The last one occurred 2 hours before my mother handed me the insurance form. The third, graduation recording edited. 2 copies, one sent by the family through a shared drive, the other from a retired officer who recorded the ceremony independently. In the family's version, the fall was cropped. No stumble, no pause in the music, no shift in the crowd, just a smooth transition to Cambria's applause. In the unedited version, I tripped near the second step. My hand clutched the rail, slipped, and I landed sideways. A few gasps. No one came forward immediately. Then someone, not Cambria, leaned down, reached out. They hadn't removed it because it was shameful. They'd removed it because it wasn't part of the story they were telling. I catalogued each video's properties, the timestamps, compression rates, edit logs, labeled the folder, if rewritten. Outside, someone walked past with a dog. The leash clicked softly against a metal clasp. The dog didn't bark. I didn't move to the window. I'd chosen this apartment because the windows didn't face anyone directly. Later that evening, I pulled out a blank notebook with no lines. In the back, I taped 3 receipts from hospital visits, the ones not covered by any plan. I drew small check marks beside the ones I had paid with cash. In pencil, I listed each account, now frozen or redirected. The margins stayed empty. I didn't explain anything. The mug still sat beside the sink. The tea bag dried into a shape like a small sail. I didn't throw it out yet. By the second night, I installed a local backup system. No cloud, no Bluetooth, no chance of accidental deletion. Each folder had 3 mirrors. If one corrupted, 2 remained. I moved to the couch with the external drive. It still had my father's note scanned from chapter 5. If anything happens to me, she knows where the backup is. She wasn't named. It didn't have to be. In his handwriting, the pronoun was enough. From a zippered pouch, I removed an old CD, burned years ago. The label had faded, but I remembered the marker color, a shade of dark green, I used to steal from his office. I inserted the CD into the drive. The screen flickered. Folder, found if they change it. Inside were letters, financial statements, a voice memo. His voice again slower than I remembered. I don't know how much she'll need, but I know she won't ask. There were no instructions, no inheritance clause, just a knowing. I saved the audio separately, named the file, didn't ask. I took a break to sweep the floor. Dust gathered quickly near the baseboard. I didn't mind. The broom was mine. After midnight, I turned off the lights but didn't lie down. I sat in the chair near the photo, watching its blurred edges in the dark. There were no blinking cameras, no keylogger software installed by someone concerned. The silence wasn't empty. It was room. By the 3rd day, I received a single email from a lawyer I didn't know, using an alias I recognized. The subject line read, Document Request, Disputed Representation, Inheritance Case 47D. I didn't open it. I already knew what it was. They'd begun cleaning the trail. I was just ahead of them this time. Before shutting the laptop, I typed 3 words into a plain text document, no more edits. I saved it under a new folder, Movement. That night, I folded the worn receipt from the grocery store, the one I had scribbled on in the hospital. I placed it between the pages of the Federalist Papers again. If anyone ever finds it, it won't explain anything. But it will prove I remembered. I didn't leave to disappear. I moved toward myself for the first time. Sometimes absence makes you visible, if only as a missing piece. Someone needs to complete their image. The message came mid-morning, just a single sentence framed like an invitation, though it read more like instruction. "Can you come for dinner? A few church guests would like to see the full family." There was no salutation, no warmth, just logistics. I reread it while the kettle boiled. Steam traced the rim of the window pane in slow, evaporating lines. The envelope that once held my birth certificate sat opened on the counter. The corner had curled from the last time I'd held it too long, thumb pressing hard over the word. Daughter. I checked the catering list they'd submitted to the event vendor, forwarded to me by someone who didn't realize my name wasn't supposed to be on their CC. Every dish was labeled. Every guest. My name wasn't anywhere on the head count. Still, I went. The driveway hadn't changed, cracks lined with moss, wind chimes tangled together like teeth in a broken jaw. The front light flickered once when I stepped up. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. Inside, voices pressed against one another. Crystal glasses clinked, and Cambria's laughter spiked above the rest like a whistle someone forgot to let cool. Her heels clicked against the hardwood, an old rhythm that once made me feel late to something. I stood near the edge of the living room next to the fake ficus that still held a strand of tinsel from 2 holidays ago. No one turned. Cambria was already mid-sentence when I caught it. "My sister's been recovering. Not fully back to herself, but we support her in every way. Family comes first." The man she was speaking to nodded. I recognized his face, one of the donors on the church's public list. He wore a navy pin on his blazer, the kind issued for civilian contribution, not service. I clicked the recorder on my phone without lifting it from my coat pocket. A woman I didn't know asked if I'd flown in for the event. Before I could answer, Mother leaned slightly between us and offered a smile too wide for the room. She stays quiet. Always has. "Let's others take the lead." The woman's expression froze somewhere between apology and confusion. Dinner came and went. My seat was an afterthought, pushed to the edge of the table, the napkin mismatched. The silverware was wrapped in a paper band instead of linen. When I unfolded it, a small tear ran through the center of the knife's paper sheath. No one noticed when I left the room briefly. I placed the backup USB beside the old family portrait, now digitally altered and reprinted to match the rest of the decor. My image had been cropped out from the right side where I'd once stood, holding Dad's sleeve with both hands. You couldn't see the edge of my dress anymore, but I remembered it clearly. Pale green with brass buttons. It had pockets. Back in the dining room, someone lifted a toast. Cambria rose quickly, glass in hand. "To moving forward with unity and grace." The toast clinked against her ring with a sharp, uneven pitch. A man with thinning grey hair approached me near the buffet line. I recognized him from the base, one of Dad's old squad leaders. "I thought you'd left the country." "That's what they told us." His voice was soft but not uncertain. I didn't reply, just handed him a slip of paper with no name, only a file path and a temporary password that would expire in 48 hours. He looked down, then nodded once. By the time the evening wound down, My coat still hung untouched on the back of the chair where I'd placed it. No one offered to take it. That kind of silence didn't need decoding. It was already fluent in every room I'd entered since returning. At home, I unpacked the last envelope from the fireproof box I kept under the floorboard. Inside was a note faded but legible in my father's blocky script. "If they ever ask you to disappear, make sure you're the one writing the record." I pressed the paper flat beneath a glass tray I'd picked up from a thrift store the week before. The tray had a chip on one side just big enough to snag a thread, but never cut the skin. The audio recording from dinner transferred in under 2 minutes. No edits, just names, claims, omissions. A perfect silence in the moment someone referred to me as her rather than Sloane. I didn't trim it. I didn't add anything. Some things speak more clearly when left whole. No one called after, no message, no inquiry, not even to ask if I'd made it home. They only reach out when something's missing in their version of the story. And this time, it wasn't me. I didn't need to speak. My silence had already submitted the evidence. The need to be seen faded the moment I realized erasure was never an accident. The mornings began without alarm clocks, just the rustle of loose tea leaves in a tin. I kept above the cabinet beside a row of identical white mugs. I chose the chipped one each time. The handle had been repaired once with a line of clear resin, leaving a faint seam where the pieces had joined back together. At the Military Archive Center, my desk sat between a dented file cabinet and a wall lined with unlabeled binders. My badge read S, Archer, no middle name, no rank. I didn't correct it. The job didn't require clearance, just precision. My task was to extract segments of outdated reports, redact personal details, sort timestamps, and categorize unindexed images for digital conversion. No one asked about my background. Once during lunch, the manager leaned in, voice steady, but low. "I don't need your service history. I need someone who does what they say they'll do." I nodded once, nothing more. In the evenings, I walked a narrow loop around the neighborhood park. Gravel under my soles, the same rhythm, each time right turn at the bench, with the missing plank pause near the willow tree, with bark worn smooth from when I didn't listen to music. I let the silence sharpen. The journal I kept was bound in cracked brown leather, the corners soft from years of being packed, unpacked, repacked. I never wrote names, only dates, symbols, fragments. Pages folded at odd angles marked memories I didn't want to reread yet. A single entry had been underlined twice in green ink, voice ID, match, confirmed, recovered. Archived. At home, I kept 3 things on the small desk by the window: a lamp with a crooked shade, a copy of the uniform code of military justice, and the journal. Everything else was kept in the drawer beneath except the thin envelope I didn't seal. Inside were 3 items: a notarized statement from the state office confirming the new name had taken legal effect, a printed email from Cambria to a council administrator, bearing a signature she'd forged. The pixelation around the loop of the G was uneven. A memory card, no larger than a thumbnail, labeled in black pen, "Dad, final draft, verbatim." When I played the recording back weeks ago, I didn't flinch. His voice was quieter than I remembered. Slower. "If you're hearing this, they've gone further than I thought." The recording ended with a breath cut short as if he knew he'd run out of time. I never shared the file. I didn't need to. Truth had urgency anymore. It just needed to exist. There was a scar along the underside of my left wrist. I stopped hiding it. The long sleeves stayed in the closet now. When someone noticed an intern once glanced too long without meaning to, I didn't cover it. just turned the page of the report I was reviewing and continued. I didn't check social media. I didn't revisit court filings. I stopped refreshing the audit tracker. Instead, I spent time reading through the handwritten margins of forgotten field journals. Soldiers long retired their notes describing dust patterns in foreign deserts or the shape of clouds before a strike, things that wouldn't be archived officially, but mattered anyway. Once while shelving a volume, I found a slip of paper folded into the back cover. It read, "She carried proof, not permission." I tucked it into my own journal without recording the source. Some things weren't meant to be proven, just preserved. The kettle at home had a small dent near the spout. Every time it whistled, it came out slightly off-key, one tone lower than standard. I kept it that way. Familiar imperfections were a kind of map. One morning I caught my reflection in the library restroom. The overhead light flickered once. I stared not out to vanity, but to check if the lines had shifted. They had. My jaw looked firmer, the skin around my eyes less watchful. Not younger, just still. Cambria's name didn't echo in my thoughts anymore. Mother's voice, too, had dulled. I still remembered her exact phrasing from the last time we spoke. Some people don't know how to stay part of a family. She hadn't meant it as cruelty, but that made it worse. In the drawer beneath my desk, I kept another item no one knew about. A copy of the original estate document, signed in Dad's handwriting, witnessed by 2 of his unit members. The ink had bled slightly in the bottom corner, smudged by his left-handed grip. My name was right there beside Cambria's, listed as co-beneficiary. No annotations, no asterisk. The updated version no longer had a second name. I didn't print it. I didn't tear it up either. It stayed in a sealed folder marked for retention. Nothing more. The woman I rented the apartment from left a note one day taped to my door. "You can stay as long as you need. No rush." She didn't sign it, just drew a small symbol in the corner, a compass. I kept the note on the refrigerator door. It covered the magnet I'd once used to hold up a family photo. I didn't miss the photo. There's a difference between being erased and choosing not to remain. I didn't explain myself anymore. No defense, no correction. I no longer moved through the world hoping to be acknowledged. I didn't live to be certified. I lived it not to be erased again. There's a silence that doesn't seek peace, it simply marks the end of permission. The envelope wasn't thick. A standard legal size, cream-colored, uncreased. I placed it flat on the counter before sealing it. Inside were only 3 items. None of them needed explanation. The weight wasn't in the paper, it was in what no longer remained. The first was a notarized renunciation of inheritance. Typed, cleanly signed without ceremony. A single signature line, no addendum. My name stood alone, no second party. The date matched the day I received my final call from the family accountant. I didn't return the voicemail. The second page was shorter. A residency withdrawal form issued by the county registrar. I had removed my name from the household record. Voluntarily. Officially. It no longer existed in association with their address or with the lineage of legal dependents. My father's name had a strike through. My mother's line read simply, head of household. I didn't mark it. The third item was visual, a photograph once framed above the family piano. We were all in uniform that day, Father at the center, Mother to the left, Cambria and I on either side. I'd taken scissors to it, along the vertical crease. The half I kept remained folded inside my journal. My side showed Father's hand, resting lightly on my shoulder. His watch was visible, the face cracked. He had refused to replace it for years. The half I returned held Cambria and Mother. both smiling, both tilted inward. I didn't crop it. I sent it as it was torn along the fault that had existed long before the paper split. I taped the envelope shut, wrote only the address of the family's legal firm. No return address, no handwritten note. The receptionist would sign for it, pass it to the assistant, and it would reach Mother's lawyer by noon. I didn't track the delivery. The necklace I wore that day was plain a single pendant, small enough to go unnoticed. A sand dollar casting in silver. My father had given it to me after my first field deployment. It had no monetary value, no engraving. But the chain had been repaired twice. I touched it only once while sealing the documents. Later that evening the call came. I let it ring 4 times before answering. I didn't speak. "You really mean to go? This far?" Mother's voice was thin, not cracked, just distant. "After everything he left behind for you," I looked at the drawer beside my desk. The navy metal case sat unopened, still wrapped in the soft cloth I'd stored it in. "You're willing to cut ties this cleanly?" My reply was steady. Not cutting. Just clearing what was never mine to begin with. She didn't respond. The silence afterward was more precise than any remark could have been. I hung up first. On my desk, the folder marked Litigation Prep Phase 2 remained untouched. I didn't open it. That night, I organized the documents into piles, financial audit surveillance metadata, and altered authorizations. Everything labeled, time-stamped, encrypted. The metal case was last. I opened it slowly, as if the hinge might refuse to move. Inside, the ribbon hadn't faded. The clasp still worked. I wrapped it in archival tissue and placed it beside the portable hard drive and the USB. The safety deposit box wasn't large, but it fit the box, the sealed drive, and the legal file without pressure. I lined the base with a cloth napkin, one of Father's old habit gifts, a military crest embroidered into one corner, the thread barely visible now. There were no tiaras, no loud gesture, just the measured return of things no longer asked for. In the lobby of the bank, a woman was filling out a wire transfer form. Her child sat beside her legs, swinging, holding a sticker sheet. I watched him for a moment. He peeled one sticker, carefully pressed it onto the corner of his shirt, then looked up to see if anyone had noticed. No one had. Walking home, I passed a thrift store I'd never entered. In the window, among worn coats and faded books, sat a music box shaped like a sailboat. The mast had snapped, glued back unevenly. The key was missing. Still, it stood upright. At the apartment, I laid the remaining photograph my half beneath the corner of my journal. It didn't need to be on display, but I didn't hide it either. Cambria had sent one final message last week. It read, "We should talk. It's been long enough." No greeting, no context. I hadn't replied. The message remained unread. Technically, but I had seen enough of it in the preview bar. They weren't reaching out for reconciliation, only to manage perception. Perhaps they worried what I had kept, what I might release, what truth looked like outside their lens. Truth didn't threaten, it simply waited. And it didn't need to explain itself anymore. When I closed the metal drawer that night, the lock clicked without resistance. I didn't test it twice. The weight was right. The decision to send the envelope wasn't dramatic. It wasn't closure. Forgiveness was mine to hold, but returning was never part of the plan. Some mornings arrive not as beginnings, but as quiet continuations of what no longer needs to be restarted. The kettle clicked just once before settling into silence. I didn't rush to pour. The ceramic mug had a small chip near the base, not sharp enough to cut, just visible enough to remind me it had survived more than one move. I'd stopped trying to match anything in the kitchen. The cup didn't need to belong to a set. Outside the window, the cactus leaned toward light it hadn't yet received. It was small, coarse, and deliberate. I hadn't watered it in 3 days. It hadn't protested. Its pot sat unevenly on the windowsill, resting against a folded tea towel I never used for tea. The chair creaked slightly beneath me, not from age, but from familiarity. I had stopped adjusting its position weeks ago. The cushion bore the imprint of my posture, slightly forward, slightly left. I'd given up trying to correct my alignment after the injury. The scar under my ribs pulsed sometimes in cold air, but not today. The book on the table had a cracked spine, pages softened at the edges from years of being flipped, dog-eared folded. I used a pencil to write along the margin short phrases, initials, a date. One corner of the page bore a brown crescent coffee from another time, another location, another version of me. In the drawer beneath the table, I kept only one file, a brown paper folder smoothed flat, sealed with a thin red string. I untied it with my thumb, slid out the stack of receipts and forms, donation, confirmations, all bearing my former legal name. The transfer of assets had been approved quietly with no press, no signatures required beyond mine. The receiving party a foundation that served veterans without next of kin. They hadn't asked for a reason. Among the papers was a folded slip, handwritten unsigned. I had written it late one night not long after finalizing the release documents. The ink was slightly faded where it bled through a fold. I'd taped it to the wall above the desk, using a strip of packaging tape already frayed on one end. You are real. You are not their version of you. No calls came that day. The phone hadn't rung in weeks. I didn't carry it from room to room anymore. Messages from utilities, confirmation codes, nothing personal. No birthdays, no invitations, no mistaken dials from old numbers. There was no mirror in the kitchen. I'd taken it down after I moved in, unsure why. The wall behind it showed 2 small nail holes still visible. I didn't paint over them. The shirt I wore had a loose thread at the cuff. I hadn't snipped it. It curled against my wrist, catching the light each time I moved the mug. The tea inside wasn't sweetened. I preferred it that way now. No sugar, no milk, no additions. Outside, someone swept the stairwell, a rhythm too practiced to be accidental. The bristles echoed up the concrete corridor like soft arguments being made and retracted. I didn't open the door. The drawer beside my bed held no photos, just a notepad with dates, a pair of earbuds, and the clipped corner of an old ID tag rusted at the edge. I kept it not for the name, but for the way the metal had dulled from contact with my collarbone over time. I hadn't returned to the base since the ceremony. They hadn't contacted me again. My last official correspondence had been a notice of file closure. Final. No appeal. The seal at the bottom bore the department crest, embossed but not gold. The neighbors never asked where I'd come from. I paid rent in cash, signed in print. There was no name on the mailbox, just a unit number, and a metal flap that stuck slightly when opened. On Sundays, I walked past a bookstore that never seemed to change its window display. The same hard cover facing forward, the same paper bird folded from a torn page suspended by fishing line above a small lamp. It flickered sometimes, but the bulb had never burned out. I thought once about writing my name on the inside cover of a book and leaving it in the laundromat down the block. I didn't do it. It would have implied the need for remembrance. I wasn't seeking it. The grocery list by the fridge had only 3 items: rice tea matches. I had crossed out matches. I no longer needed to light anything by hand. A small tear in the curtain, had gone unnoticed by visitors if there had been any. It allowed a single strip of light through in the mornings. I timed my tea around it. Not ritual, just rhythm. The calendar on the wall had only one date circled, not a birthday or anniversary, just a reminder. First full month rent received. No exclamation, no underlining. There were no frames in the room, no certificates, no sealed envelopes from schools or committees. The only thing pinned to the corkboard was a faded post-it that read, "This time, no edits." I hadn't removed it. There had been a time when absence frightened me, when not being included meant not being counted, when silence from them made me wonder if I had done something wrong. But now the absence was full, not empty. And I had stopped measuring my existence in terms of their notice. The steam from the mug had long since disappeared. I reached for the cup again, not to drink, but simply to feel its warmth against my palms. A simple ceramic curve. No inscription. I set it back down on the wooden coaster. The grain had worn into a spiral over time, almost like a fingerprint. I didn't center it. I let it rest slightly off to the side exactly as it was. I no longer need to prove that I exist, whether they remember or not. I live. Here, inside this stillness, and being unseen doesn't make me any less real.